sorry for having such a difficult name. But as we will maybe get to know from my speech, there might be a solution in the future for such kind of translations or pronunciations. So some of you may have been to my talk yesterday. So I already outed myself as a science fiction fan, and the reason for this is I think that science fiction's role is to prepare people to accept the future without pain and to encourage flexibility of the mind. And I think we're now in a time where this flexibility of mind is quite necessary, as we are seeing in our daily life like many examples that at least I didn't really imagine that will come, even if I was really interested in this. And that's why I have data here, because I think that was like, for many of us, as for me, was like very interesting from the perspective of human-machine interaction, because it was actually an artificial intelligence trying to interact with humans with all these difficulties and flaws and having issues with the emotional intelligence, for example, while being extremely intelligent in this artificial way. But how did I come actually to this topic? So I have been working in the customer experience for the last about 13 years. And of course, as I started, there was not much of a talk about artificial intelligence. So basically, my job was mostly damage control. Especially as like 12 or 13 years ago, nobody in Germany spoke about customer experience. And back then, as we recommended to make user tests, for example, the common answer of the customer was, no problem, the user will learn how it works at the end if the tests turned out to be not in their way. And even if this kind of situation still can happen today, it actually became less and less common, even here. And the reason for this is that technology is basically everywhere. It's not like, it's still like 12 or 13 years ago, it was still considered kind of a productivity tool, even if we back then already had like Facebook, or in German we had StudiVZ, for those who remember this. That was actually my first job in Germany, working there. But even there, in this like digital native products, customer experience hasn't really been a thing. But now when you think of where the technology is, I mean, remember StudiVZ you were only able to use on a PC or Facebook back then. There was like nothing like a mobile experience, yeah? So you were actually going into the internet to use it. Now you don't go into internet, you just have the internet, you have sensors everywhere, you can have a connected toothbrush, you can have a connected t-shirt, basically everything is connected. So the role of technology is totally different. And one of the biggest factors driving this change is actually the artificial intelligence that has a massive impact on how we interact with technology. And I want shortly just to specify what I mean with AI when I talk about it. I definitely don't mean strong AI. That's something we are still quite far away from it. And what I talk about is rather algorithms or machine learning, because that are the topics that we are dealing with right now. Because when we go into direction of strong AI, I guess we will have other issues than just designing human-machine interaction. And many people, at a first glance, especially when I talk to developers, but on the other hand as well, to designers as well, or business people, they ask, okay, how does machine learning have an influence on design? Like this one is machine learning is very technical, design is very creative. But I think that they are like two parts of, it's like kind of symbiotic, like the heart and the brain. And I think the best example for this was a comment I got after posting an article about using AI in Duolingo. The answer was, why do you think there is AI in this? I'm using it, I don't see any AI. And I think that's basically the point about using AI in user experience. You shouldn't sit there and see, oh, here's AI, here's AI, here's AI. It should just work as it's supposed to work. And that's actually very interesting Duolingo. Who's using Duolingo here? Quite some people. So for example, what you might have seen if you have been using it for a long time, the introductory tests that Duolingo uses to estimate your language, your level of the language knowledge, changed a lot, especially due to artificial intelligence. The first ones were very exhausting for people with sufficient language knowledge, because you had to get through this whole levels to get actually to the difficult stuff. Now they changed the method and they actually start with very easy questions, and then based on your answers actually give you more difficult or easier next questions. So based on this, they managed to actually reduce the time you need to start. And the same when you see, you will see when you're learning language actually that you will see that some sentences repeat based on how you have done the last time and so on. So I think that's actually the best compliment when you say, okay, I don't see any artificial intelligence in the design, it's just working how it should work. And you will see very different ways of using artificial intelligence in design. I think one of the interesting ones I saw as I sublet my apartment like 1 year ago for the first time at Airbnb. And they did a lot to make it very easy for hosts. So I don't have to look all the time and define my price and so on. So with the dynamic pricing, I just say, okay, what's my maximum, what's my minimum? And I don't really need to take care of it because it's all based on how much clicks does my apartment get, how are the prices generally, or how high is the interest right now in Berlin, and all this criteria that I will not be able actually to manage by myself, or maybe I will be able, but it's like not my main job to manage my Airbnb apartment. And then, so that's again a major improvement in user experience, reducing actually the needed interaction time. And of course, where you see most of the algorithms, all of the personalization stuff. I mean, my YouTube channel looks actually pretty boring because I only watch John Oliver on YouTube. But that's actually a good example for the algorithm maybe not working that well, because what are you getting based on this algorithm? You're just getting more of what you already know and more and more and more. But you will see some kind of ethical problems actually with this kind of algorithmic design, because if you would start watching like far left or far right content, for example, yeah, the algorithms will make you actually more and more extreme by showing you what you already know, but just adding a little bit of it to this. So you will find yourself starting to watch with something that's kind of harmless and ending up with really, really far-right stuff, for example. And so that's one of the moral problems of this kind of algorithm use. The other is, of course, I mean, let's be honest, who don't know the situation when you just wanted to watch like one YouTube video? Or one episode on Netflix. How well did this go, yeah? Just because the algorithms are so good and they are recommending you more and more of this interesting stuff, you just realize, oh, it's 2 in the night, I just have to go to sleep now after like 2 hours. And this personalization algorithm, we actually quite get used to this. They're starting actually also to to explain itself a little, but like again and again you find some interesting things there that are actually not really suitable, but you think they must have sense because they are there. So when you look at this, so you see all these books like, you know, design, human interface, psychology, and then you see that's baby wish list, everything you need in one list. So when I saw this, I thought, do they know something I don't know yet? Did I search for something, you know? It was like shortly after my 30th birthday, so I thought, is it a suggestion? Is it kind of a anticipatory design? Yeah, I really did a pregnancy test after this. Yeah, so because I mean Amazon algorithm can't be wrong. Yeah, because that's what I kind of expected a little bit, that this whole story goes more. And you know these examples, maybe if you heard the story of Target, where this like 16 years old girl gets sent kind of also like a pregnancy and baby advertisement and so on. And the father goes to the store manager and says, what do you think you're doing? She's 16. Are you trying to convince her to get pregnant? And then like 2 weeks after this, he actually finds out that she really was pregnant, and they were able to actually identify this behavior or identify the pregnancy based on her changed shopping behavior. So without any buying of any explicit things, the production and the anticipation is just getting better and better. So what do I mean with anticipatory experiences? So if I get home tonight and I will write my boyfriend, hi darling, I will be here at 8 and I'm pretty exhausted and tired. And this would be the anticipatory experience. So without telling anything, I will get a warm bath with some wine and candles and all this stuff. And what we mostly get in the interactions with software and with the human software as well is kind of not this anticipatory experience, because they still expect from us to give them like kind of explicit directions. But there is some hope actually, especially when it comes to the software. So you have like this small anticipatory designs in like everything you need. The GIF seems not to work, and it works. So when you use, I mean, I probably don't write any full words anymore when I write texts, because I just get some recommendations, and you are able to write like simple messages without actually doing any typing, even if sometimes you get quite funny stuff. The same you get like with smart linking, you know, when you have something like tomorrow. Then you can directly create a calendar entry. Funny thing, it still doesn't work. It doesn't understand context. So when the mail would say, I cannot make it tomorrow, it will still recommend me to create an event, and not actually the opposite, to delete the event. So we are not quite there yet. And actually, one of my favorite anticipatory experience, to be honest, is Foursquare. If you actually, of course, if you have the locations turned on. So one of the most amazing experiences were actually, we have been sitting in an Asian restaurant here in Berlin, and we were sitting outside and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then and there was actually a push notification from Foursquare. The best tip for this location: you have to order inside. So that was very helpful, and actually that felt really anticipatory. And the same like similar situation I had last time with actually Google Now and Lufthansa, and that was actually really funny, because I mean, I normally would expect to get the information about the delay from Lufthansa directly, but actually the notification came way earlier via Google Now than it came through Lufthansa. So I received the information via Google Now that my flight is delayed, so I don't need to like rush to the airport right now. And the other kind of anticipatory experience I actually really like is for example, Google Trips. So basically, it's minimizing actually any need of my interaction and my data input, which I think is like one of the most important and interesting things in user experience design, because it basically gets everything from my current bookings. And considering also my preferences and my locations, it creates like plans for me. It doesn't really work in every city. I have been to Albania this year, and it didn't work so well. But for example, when I have been to Oslo, it was like amazing. I basically didn't need any planning at all. I just had to use this, and I get everything I wanted. But this is still, all these examples are kind of in the area of graphical user interface. Sorry. And we, especially as a designer, we really actually like to talk about graphical interface, because for us, like for our generation, that's actually, design is graphical user interface. But because we don't really know anything else, I mean, the graphical interface is actually about as old as I am. So for us, it's natural, but actually we always have to remember when discussing design that and human-machine interaction that it hasn't been like this for a long time. And the user interface design is just like 30-something. And it doesn't mean that it will keep like this until the end, because that's actually not the really most natural way of interacting between humans and machines. I mean, what is the most natural way of interaction for us humans? It's actually language, and not necessarily like clicking on buttons and filling in forms. That still feels quite artificial. Especially when you have like some complex information or complex interaction. So try, for example, book a flight. It can really take like 30 steps or something on like 15 screens. And I have a very basic need that I would be able to actually say in just few words without filling in so many forms. And especially as the screen gets smaller and smaller, we focus more and more actually for not the customer experience optimization, but on the screen experience optimization. And sometimes we forget that actually the best interface is no interface at all, or as little interface as possible. So that's why, like 2-3 years ago, the conversational interface started to being a thing. And that's very logical, because it's easier to understand written text that has some structure than spoken text with accents and so on. And while there are some nice use cases for this, you have chatbots for diagnostics. You have chatbots even for talking to the dead. So that was like actually one of kind of scary but kind of very interesting customer experience. So this guy's father was dying, and he recorded like conversations with him for a year, and based on that he built a chatbot so he can interact with him after he's dead. So that's actually quite interesting, and maybe we will still use it like this. But we can also think about the next step, actually transferring it into spoken word. But on the other hand, you still have like a lot of chatbots that work, not so well. So I'm not sure if you can read this, especially when you're behind. So, for example, here the question: how would you describe the term bot to your grandma? And the answer is, my grandma is dead. And the answer from the bot: all right, thank you for your feedback. And the same here, yeah, it doesn't really understand context. All right, everything else to add to your shopping cart: add 4 apples. Oh, I meant 4 bananas. okay, I added to your shopping cart 4 apples and 4 bananas. So this kind of communication doesn't work that well. And the other problems with the chatbots is actually that reading is not so easy. I mean, in the mass, we just read for the last like 100, 200 years, while we speak for like rather a million years. And I'm always like think that the statistics are actually pretty scary, because when you look even at Germany, which is a country with very little illiteracy, you still have 10 million Germans, grown-up Germans, that actually learned how to read and write, but didn't use it, so they actually forget how to do this. And that's actually a massive problem when you concentrate the interactions on text. That's why you hear like more and more people in the subway actually speaking their messages instead of typing this, because that's just way easier, and that's just how people are used to communicating. And I mean, you have like for now 2 years all these possibilities of voice interaction that are maybe not yet so perfect and so sufficient. And you even have like the Barbie that is able to communicate with your child in a spoken language. Forget about the privacy topics right now, yeah? That I will not start with this, because then we will not go out here. The consequences for the customer experience will be actually quite wide and quite broad, especially when you look, for example, on how the shopping behavior might change when you don't have this browsing possibility. So that's how, for example, Amazon voice search works. Just let me show me this video.
Dinner in 15 minutes! Alexa, order more dog food.
Based on your order history, I found Taste of the Wild dry dog food with roasted bison and venison. It's $53.69 total. Would you like to buy it?
Yes. Alexa, order trash liners.
I found Glad Tall trash bags. Would you like to buy it?
Yes. Alexa, what are your deals?
I have several exclusive deals, including Lindor Chocolate Deluxe Gift Box. Would you like to buy it?
Yes.
So basically what you can see here is like the way we might be shopping with voice is completely different. So when I go to Amazon right now and type in dog food, I will get like such a list of recommendations. If I order dog food via voice, I will just get like one recommendation that I already bought, or the best recommendation, because no way that someone will read to me like 500 results. So that might be very difficult also for brands to become discovered, and also for the designers actually how to design this kind of interface. And what's actually interesting as a next step to voice interface is this one. This application is called Lyrebird. Maybe one of you or two of you heard about this. Let me just play it to you. Oops, sorry.
Maybe in the near future, it will be very easy to generate a voice of a person based on a few recordings. I could have, for example, a digital assistant that sounds like my mom and a sex robot that sounds like my boyfriend.
So can you recognize that's my voice actually? And this was generated based only on like 30 sentences. So I had to record 30 sentences, and this was able to generate actually my voice. So what would this be a consequence for actually design, where you don't only have this few random voices for the applications, but you can actually give your robot or your app or your assistant actually any voice you want, with many consequences for like topics like deepfake that you probably also might have heard of. And this goes even further. It's not only possible to actually mimic the voice of someone, it's actually also possible to mimic facial expressions or even movements. So basically, yeah, you can emulate everything. What does this mean for the future of the customer experience? But still you have some very, very creepy interfaces, voice interfaces, especially when, you know, some of the, for example, German car makers think they can do it better than Amazon, for example.
Straße.
Abbruch.
Waldenser Straße.
Wie bitte?
Waldenser Straße.
Die Straße bitte.
So, I mean, this, especially when you are in the car situation where you actually, you know, we were not driving by the time because we were just experimenting, and it took us really like 15 minutes, and it still didn't understand our address actually, and was asking all this very, very strange questions. So. This might be actually a really dangerous customer experience when you are actually driving and trying to get some information, and actually using voice in this case is perfect because then you still have free hands and you don't have to operate with this. But I mean, as you can see on Alex here, he is already like, ah! And if he would be driving, that would be definitely even worse. And but some of you probably might have seen the movie Her. It's like already like 3 or 4 years old. I think that's a really nice piece of science fiction that is actually basically in the present or in the very, very near future, where you don't talk to your virtual assistant that stands somewhere, but you are actually having it all the time in your ear. And as you may have heard, Google Pixel Buds, that's something in this direction. That's why I was speaking before about like the pronunciation and the translation. And so they are actually creating some kind of Babelfish, where you basically have this clip in your ear, and you can simultaneously translate languages. So that would be a completely new level of customer experience if you could communicate with basically everyone in his or her language. And then you of course have all the different smart things that can also only work based on algorithms or based on artificial intelligence, and they don't even need a screen anymore. Yeah, so they are learning, for example, when you have like smart mattress covers that actually learn from your sleep data, learn what kind of temperature you prefer, and basically interact by just making it work. So that's kind of, for me, the ideal customer experience where I don't really have to deal with anything. Or another interesting experience is this, I forget how it's called, the Google camera. It had very mixed reviews, but it basically, you put it in your house or you put it somewhere and it analyzes the pictures all the time, and it takes just the most interesting pictures. So it identifies when something interesting is happening and it's taking pictures of it. I mean, again, privacy-wise, a little scary, but on the other hand, how often does it happen that maybe something funny is happening, or you see something that's really nice, but you just didn't manage to get out your phone and make the picture, and it's just recording everything and identifying it by itself. Again, privacy, difficult. And one aspect that's particularly interesting to me because I think that's still one of the most difficult things in a human-machine interaction is the emotional intelligence. And more and more companies are trying actually to make the AI more emotional and more emotionally intelligent. So you have Microsoft with this emotion AI API, and you have, for example, Affectiva that also identifies based on where the person is looking and what are the facial expressions. So this is, for example, an interface for a car where the camera can identify if the person is actually distracted, which she is in this case. But you can use it for different kind of situation. Also, for example, for user testing of your products, you can immediately identify how is the person interacting? Is it happy? Is it irritated? Is he or she angry? And if we combine this with language assistance, for example, and with also language recognition, which is still another problem when it comes to things like irony, when it comes to jokes, it still doesn't understand this. But when you combine the facial expressions with the language, you can get an AI that's actually much more emotionally intelligent. And we don't really have much of application of this kind yet, but I think that's kind of the next step to come, even before we will come to the next one where we basically don't need any interface at all because it will all happen in our brain, and you have like a lot of research based on that. So, for example, we have Chinese researchers that make the car that can be driven by just your mind, which probably will not be that interesting when we have like self-driving cars, but it's still like still quite interesting that that this direct brain-computer interface is already happening, and you have it especially when it comes to modern prosthetics. So that's actually the best way of direct brain-machine interface, where basically the machine becomes the extension of the human brain and works in kind of a symbiosis. I think that this kind of experience will also be more and more often in the future. These were just some examples of how it looks to the user. How much time do I have? I have to come to the end slowly, yeah? Okay. So the second part, I also wanted to show you how AI is actually impacting the job of the designer already. And this job is actually evaluating already. Like, we just had like designers before, and then we have screen designer, UX designer, mobile designer, interaction designer. Now we're getting voice designer, bot personality designer, and all this kind of new design jobs that are created thanks to the changing in the different interfaces. And while when theoretically the job has a very little chance to be automated, especially when you compare it to the developers that are approximated with 50%. I'm still not sure if it looks so rosy, because there are still like a lot of tasks in design that are being automated, and they become automated in the last years. Yeah, I mean, when you remember, like, even 5 years ago, you needed to make like every banner for every size separately, and now it's actually quite standard to automatize this. And you have more and more software that's actually helping to automatize design creation. So, for example, this one is
to an example of a
pretty
retail
interesting.
website design.
I don't need a voice for this. So that the researchers from MIT did this to actually, it looks like a typical like heat maps, but they are actually not. So they are based on predictions. So they used like thousands of data sets of websites, and actually you can use it, as you see. You can move the stuff around, and you will get the prediction where will the user look at. So you don't need to like wait for the data, but you have actually quite a good approximation already directly in the process. So of course you will still probably evaluate it with your data after the website, for example, is live. But getting this even before, it can actually save you quite a lot of money and effort that you will need afterwards. Another quite interesting thing, especially like for a person like me who is like very untalented when it comes to drawing, is the Google Auto Draw, which makes it possible to actually create kind of pictures that someone can recognize without being an artist. So that's what you get from this. For example, it recognizes already the possible shapes, and you can just choose it. So that can make actually, especially like very simple visualizations so much faster, and so much easier, and so much more available to everyone. Like little bit similar things as what you might know from Airbnb. So they basically made it possible also based on image recognition. They recognize the patterns from the drawing and can actually directly match it to the interface, to the design patterns they already have. So you basically can create directly mock-ups from drawings, which again makes prototyping so much easier and so much faster. And I think that there are like much more examples like this, and I think that's pretty clear where we're going to. And another, also a very, very funny or very, very interesting example for using it to create design. Nutella used an algorithm to create actually 7 million unique packagings of Nutella in Italy. So like every customer were able to get his or her own Nutella packaging. And you can still see that there is kind of pattern that's still recognizable, that there is some kind of similarity in this design, and still each and every one is totally different. So I think this kind of mass personalization might be also a next step that is only possible through algorithms. So does it mean that the job of the designer will be over soon? Probably not. I think actually the opposite. I think that the algorithms give us a great possibility to make the job even better and focus on the core of the job, and focus especially on this. I mean, there is no design talk without Steve Jobs, obviously. So design, it's not just what it looks and feels like. Design, it's how it works. And when I'm sometimes asked about like prediction, okay, where is it going to, and how it will look like in 5 or 10 years, and I think it's very, very difficult to predict, because these changes are so exponential. So the only thing I'm pretty sure about this, that the AI, especially for the next few years, will not look like this, which is that typical stock photo you get when you search for AI, but rather like this, rather acting in the background, and rather how my friend with his comment said to me about Duolingo, I don't see any AI in there, but it's still there, and it's changing actually the user experience for the better. Thanks. So that was it.
Thank you very much. Sorry again for my pronunciation.
No problem.
We can train later a bit, maybe. Yeah, any questions? Maybe?
There seem not to be very many Germans in the audience, because when there are many Germans, there are always questions. So I don't know. It just came. It was like this as I came to Germany like 13 years ago. I just found out everyone is always kind of interacting a lot and asking questions and answering. Yeah. There is
Wait
one.
a second. come to you.
Hi. So there was one small contradiction to what you showed us. So you showed that it's like 8.7% the probability of AI replacing designers, and at the same time you show the Nutella packaging of 7 million. So it means that some graphic designers didn't get to design them.
Yeah, that's what I said when I showed you this. That I'm not quite sure that's actually correct. This 8%, because I think that there are many jobs of the designer, or maybe not many jobs, but many tasks that the designer does. And I think it doesn't necessarily mean that the designers will be replaced, but that the way the designers work will change, and that we will maybe focus more on psychology or on creativity, and less of this typical, side tasks like cropping banners to the specific size or something like this. So that's why I think it's not necessarily bad. And also, especially when you look at this kind of things I showed you with the prediction of the heat map. Like 10 years ago, it was all about what do I think that works and what do you think that works, and it was all about opinion. And now we can work so much with data, so we don't maybe need to use so much time about discussing about opinions, but rather go with the data and design with the data in mind.
Any other questions? Then thank you very much again, and
Thanks.
yeah,
Oops.
see you later.